Let us start the 18th session of Secrets of Spirituality. To continue with the discussion which we had in the yesterday's session, when we see beauty in nature, can we simply say it is simply a chemical arrangement of atoms and molecules? Can we simply be dispassionate about whatever we experience through our sensory organs? So, when there is beauty in the sight, when there is melody in the sound, when there is comfort in the touch, when there is pleasure in the taste, when there is happiness in the smell, all these sensory experiences, can we simply say it is just chemistry or it is just physics? Can we say love as something chemistry? Can we say that the love originating, compassion originating, mercy originating, or concern originating, can we call all these things? It is simply brain chemistry. That is why in the yoga, they called it as four antakarana, manas, chitta, buddhi, ahankara. These four are beyond physics, chemistry, biology, and mathematics. Of course, they may be part of mathematics because there are four inner organs mentioned. But they are beyond physics, chemistry, and biology, we should say. So, to continue with the discussion, when in nature we see arrangement of water as 2/3, arrangement of land within this water as 1/3. Actually, whatever we call it as earth is land floating within water body. If at all the ice in the Arctic region, in the Antarctic region, and in the Himalayas or in the Alps, wherever this ice is there, which is existing because of cold temperature, due to any reason, if all the ice on this earth melts, then we will have only water everywhere. Only water. You may remember the mythical stories of Manu or Noah, Manu's boat or Noah's ark. And it has been told that Manu's boat was stuck in the Himalayan mountains and Noah's ark was stuck in the Mount of Sinai. What does all these instances mean? That due to some calamity, maybe the whole of the cold ice bodies melted and the whole existence of the earth itself would have been completely water at that time. So now also, due to any reason, if the earth's temperature increases, then definitely all ice will melt. This was the threat which people were telling, scientists were telling since many decades, that ozone layer is depleting and UV rays of the sun will be coming into the atmosphere of earth and the global warming is happening. It was happening. Now look at the situation. The law of divine balance has taken place and the ozone layer is covered up now. Pollution on earth is drastically reduced. Temperature is reduced and you are seeing rainfall everywhere. What does it mean? This is the law of divine balance. Nature knows how to replenish itself. Nature knows how to cross over the challenges. So that way, if all these material arrangements are systematically planned and made, and the life forms are systematically originated on this planet Earth, we should say that whatever material existence is there, it is out of divine intention. If earth is existing, if water is existing, if fire is existing, if air is existing, if space is existing, then they are not existing just as entities mentioned in the physical sciences. If there is arrangement of molecules or atoms, it is with a specific purpose, because through matter only life is being originated. And matter is not just a matter, it is a systematic arrangement of atoms and molecules for some other bigger purpose. That is why when we see something beautiful, we cannot say beauty is just a physical or chemical arrangement. Let me proceed to the next slide. You can see this ice floating on water body. You also know that ice is H2O. You also know that water is also H2O. But the solidified water is ice and liquefied ice is water. So then it is obvious that water came first, then ice came next. Because water has to solidify to become ice. Water is a combination of H2 and O with the different type of bonding, which is a loose bonding. Whereas ice is again H2 only, but it is like a crystalline bonding, which is a solid bonding or a bonding which is nearby. Otherwise, water and ice are one and the same chemically. 2 hydrogen atoms, 1 oxygen atom. But the distance between these atoms is lesser in case of ice. The distance between atoms is larger in case of water. Now logically it simply means that hydrogen and oxygen were existing separately as air, and through some divine intention or through some divine intervention, 2 hydrogen molecules and 1 oxygen molecule were bound, and that became water molecule. And again through some divine intervention or through some divine intention, the bondings were made nearer to make it a solid structure. So logically we can conclude that solid was later on, liquid was first, before liquid it was air. Anybody can understand this simple principle. If H2 and O2, hydrogen and oxygen, are existing separately even now, and if H2 and O is becoming water, and the same water is becoming ice, then it simply means hydrogen and oxygen as part of air were there before, then they got bound to become water, and the water was solidified to become ice due to the effect of reduced temperature. The same ice, when the temperature increases, becomes water. What does it mean? It simply means solid was later on, before that liquid was there, before liquid air was there. With the same logic, we can conclude earth was later on, before that water was there, before that air was there. Now again the question may come, if the earth was later on, in the mud we have so many minerals, so many metallic residues, so many stones in the earth. So now again the conclusion is a rock or a stone is a tightly bound arrangement of molecules, whereas the same rock, when it is crushed, it becomes a powder. The same mud will contain lot of silicon and sand related items. In the river stream, at the river bank, you can see lot of sand. What does it mean? The mud was washed away and the sand remained. Sand is part of rocks. So we should say any rock or any stone which is highly solid means it's a tightly bound arrangement of these particles. When it is loosely bound, it is becoming mud itself. So what does it mean? All these atoms and molecules, when they are loosely bound, they gradually become tightly bound, then they become tighter bound, tightest bound. The people who have studied physics in detail, you already know that carbon has many allotropes. Graphite, diamond, coal, charcoal are all allotropes of carbon. All are the arrangement of carbon atoms only. But diamond is very tightly bound, whereas graphite is loosely bound. Charcoal and coal are also loosely bound. If the same charcoal is crushed, it will become carbon powder, which is much loosely bound. So the distance between the two atoms and how much distance has to be there between the two atoms, if it is in diamond as carbon or if it is in graphite as carbon, who decides? In the diamond, carbon has to be very tightly bound, and in the graphite, carbon has to be very loosely bound. Who decides? The creator decided, intended, and produced carbon that way, to be coal, to be charcoal, to be graphite, to be diamond. So we can logically conclude that any solid structure was not originated in the beginning. Before it became solid, it was rarefied. It was looser, then it became tighter. Any tightly bound material did not come into existence suddenly out of its own. All those atoms were loosely bound, then they were tightly brought nearer, and by means of that binding energy, all the solid materials are created or produced, we should say. This energy which is binding each and everything is called in the Indian philosophy as Adi Shakti, the primordial energy. It is the primordial energy which is energizing every electron. It is the primordial energy which is binding every atom into molecule, many molecules into some solid substances or liquid substances. The people who have studied physics, you already know that there is nuclear fission also, there is nuclear fusion also. Both are going to release a tremendous amount of energy. You already know about the outcomes of the hydrogen bomb or the usages of uranium and plutonium. You know that when these radioactive elements are utilized, They can cause calamity and danger. And these nuclear fissions or nuclear fusions result in a larger disposal of energy, which can be highly destructive. Whatever happened in the Second World War at Japan, you are all aware of. So this means what? All these molecules are tightly bound by a divine intervention. Now human beings have become so arrogant that they have started disturbing the natural laws. Human beings think that they can get into any particular material and they can divide even the binding forces. That is how they have been producing destructive materials, destructive weapons for killing each other. Now, as far as the law of divine balance is concerned, without using any weapon, nature is destroying human people itself, human beings itself. Without any nuclear fission, without any nuclear fusion, by means of a simple, non-living, non-moving virus, the whole of human existence is under threat. Now, this is also a divine intervention. It is the law of divine balance. I should tell you a small example here. At times you might have read that some whale comes into the seashore and the whale dies there. Sometimes many whales come into the seashore, they die there. Even when they are pushed back into the sea or the ocean, again they'll come back to the seashore and they die. And people think they are committing suicide by coming on the seashore. No. It is the Adi Shakti making them to die that way. It is the law of divine balance, where if something is exceeding its limit, it is somehow made to die. It is somehow made to perish. There is one more strange happening in the world of fishes inside the ocean. There is a primitive species of fishes, and it is a group of fishes in large number. In general, in this group of fishes, male and female ratio will be almost 50-50. But whenever due to any erroneous multiplication or due to any mutative chemical production, if the offspring's ratio and the male and female ratio is going out of balance, then there is a method called sequential hermaphrodites in case of these fishes, where suddenly some male fishes can become female fishes, or suddenly some female fishes can become male fishes without their own knowledge, to bring back this ratio of 50-50. So who is deciding this sequential hermaphrodites multiplication? The one who is within the body of the fishes only is deciding. In the yoga bhasha or in the yogic parlance, we call this spiritual force which is inside every living body as Kundalini or Maya or Adi Shakti. So this energy is conscious. The energy knows what to bind with what, and out of what type of binding, what type of outcome is going to happen. It is through the divine law, through the divine intervention, through the divine intention. Now, whenever human beings try to affect this divine law or the natural laws, in one way or the other, it is the human beings who are going to suffer the most. That is well established in this time of pandemic, where there is uncertainty everywhere. But one thing is certain, if you take nature for granted, nature can easily eradicate you within a few days and a few months. At least now these human beings should understand that there is divine law in force. At least now the human beings should understand the teachings of Jesus Christ, the teachings of Moses, the teachings of Zarathustra, the teachings of Prophet Muhammad, the teachings of Gautama Buddha, the teachings of Vardhamana Mahavira Tirthankara, the teachings of Guru Nanak, the teachings of so many holy people. Especially Hindus should remember the teachings of Vedavyasa, the teachings of all the Acharyas. For centuries together, whatever they have been telling, if people do not understand that, if people do not find time to understand that, instead if people are involved only in their materialistic science, now in this year 2020, it is for these people to learn that there is something beyond their normal comprehension. There is something that is deciding to bond what with what to produce what. So, in the Vedic studies, there are 6 types of Shastras called Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa, Vedanta. Now, Sankhya and Yoga is one part, Nyaya, Vaisheshika is one part, Mimamsa and Vedanta is one part. Sankhya and Yoga is more of inner studies. Mimamsa and Vedanta are more of outer studies, whereas Nyaya and Vaisheshika is more of inner as well as outer studies. So the 6 Darshanakaras are the 6 great philosophers who defined these 6 darshanas. These are called Shad Darshana, 6 darshanas. Kapila, Patanjali, Gautama, Kanada, Jaimini, Vyasa. These were called as 6 Darshanakaras, 6 great philosophers, out of which especially Nyaya and Vaisheshika, Gautama and Kanada, they discuss a lot about the materialistic existence and how they are bound, and ultimately through what they are bound. That is called as Indian logic or Bharatiya Tarkashastra. It is possible to arrive at the self-realization or ultimate realization or the truth of God by observing and thinking and discussing. That is called Tarka. That is what right now we are doing. So logically we can come to a conclusion that all solids were the latter part. Before that, it must have been the liquid part. Before that, it must have been an aerial part. So you are seeing a rock here at the left side, and you are seeing clouds there at the top. Below you are seeing water. Now we can always say that because of the sun's light's heat, water evaporates and goes up and cools up, becomes cloud. And the cloud is carrying to certain amount water molecules. And wherever the clouds are compressed, the same water molecules get cooled down and they fall down as rain. You know these processes. Now look at this cloud. Whether the cloud is solid, you cannot say it is solid. But if I say, is it liquid? You cannot say it is liquid. You will say cloud is cloud. My question comes back that you know that rock is solid. You know that water is liquid. What is cloud? You will say cloud is not liquid, sir. Then you will say cloud is not purely solid also, sir, because cloud is floating. If cloud is floating in the air and if the cloud is taken away by the wind, cloud is so light. But look at the area it occupies. The area which it occupies is much larger and it is floating in the air. So how much of mass may be there in the cloud? There may be very less mass, sir, you may say. But then I should ask you, when rain falls in Bangalore city, it has been falling down since many days now. For hours together when rain falls on Bangalore city, that much of weight was there in the clouds only, right? So much of water went as vapor to the top and so much of water got collected in the clouds and so much of rain is falling down. Let us say continuously for 2 hours or 3 hours, if there is rainfall in Bangalore city, if you measure all that water, how many liters of water, how many kilograms of water, or how many tons of water, all that water was there in the clouds only, right? Now clouds are floating, clouds are carrying water molecules. You cannot say clouds are heavy. But when so much of rain is falling, you cannot say clouds are light also. Is cloud a solid? We cannot say fully yes. Is cloud liquid? We cannot say fully yes. But we are seeing clouds every day. We think we have understood everything, right? Have we understood this mechanism of clouds? The answer is, as it is a divine purpose that water should be carried on the surface of earth and wherever it is required, rain should fall down so that vegetation can grow, trees and plants can be nourished, fruits and vegetables will be produced, life will be sustained. If rain does not fall down, life will not be sustained. There is a divine purpose. We know that environmentalists will say for having a good atmospheric climate, it is very much necessary that we should have forests. Because whenever forests are preserved, rainfall will happen adequately. But what is the relationship between forests and rainfall? If there is a forest anywhere, ultimately these clouds are only being evaporated because of the sun's lights, heat falling on the ocean, and the clouds are going up and the clouds are moving through the wind. What is the relationship between rainfall and the cultivation of forests? How does these clouds know that there is this forest somewhere and we have to go there, then we have to pour out all our water on the forests so that forest will survive? How do they know? Who gives these clouds the addresses that you go to this particular forest area only and you pour your water on the forests? Who decides? Ultimately, clouds do not have any consciousness of their own. Who decides? Who else than the Adi Shakti? Who else than the natural consciousness? That is why Earth is called as Mother in Indian philosophy. That is why Adi Shakti is also mentioned as Mother only in the Indian philosophy. Even though it is a natural consciousness, natural intelligence, natural force, it is regarded as the divine mother in the Indian spiritual tradition. Now, continuing with the same logic, you can see a solid rock at the left side. You can see a liquid water below. You can see a vaporized water as cloud at the top. So, did cloud come first or water come first? The answer is water itself, because water is evaporating to become cloud. So, cloud cannot have been before water. Rock cannot have been before water. Rock has to be solidification of earthy materials only. So there is a heavy force or a much larger force which is binding the other materials to become solid. And that is how on this earth we have the most solid materials, and then we also have rarely solid materials like cloud. I come back to the same discussion of atomic binding energy, and whatever they call it as atomic binding energy in the physics, they just keep on mentioning the binding energy of different atoms. But the question remains, how come these binding energies came into existence in the very first place? The answer is only because of the intention of the divine consciousness. In the Indian philosophy, they mentioned these elements as Panchabhutas, solid, liquid, and fire, and gas, and space. In fact, such translation in English is not adequate. I should use the Samskrita terminology only. Prithvi, Apaha, Tejaha, Vayuhu, Akasha. Even though we call it as fire, it is not actually fire. We should mention it as heat. Or we should mention it as some type of energy which is causing the binding also, and it is causing the removal of the binding also. The same heat can be utilized to melt gold also, and the same heat can be utilized to mold gold also, right? We cannot say fire as fire. That is why fire is mentioned with a different word called Agni in Sanskrita. Prithvi, Apas, Tejas, Vayu, Akasha. This Tejas is many times mentioned as Agni as well. And in the early period of Vedic scriptures, they always used to mention Agni only as God. The Vyutpatti for Agni is Agre Nayati iti Agnihi. The one who carries forward is Agni. So coming back to the discussion of the Panchabhutas, solid came later. Before that there was water. Before that there was air. H2 and O2 became H2O. Then it became ice. Now the question is, if H2 and O2, hydrogen and oxygen atoms, they combine together to become water, what is making them to combine? So there is an energy required to bring these atoms together and to make them remain bound. Otherwise, hydrogen and oxygen together, they do not have any decision making abilities. They are two gaseous elements in nature. Atoms are not conscious of their own. When atoms are not conscious of their own, how do they come together and remain bound as water. That is where they mention the energy which is binding them as Agni. So it does not really mean fire. Fire is one form of Agni, or fire is one form of Tejas. Tejas doesn't simply mean brightness or glow. Tejas means the energy which is causing the binding of these atoms, and later they remain bound. So, physics says only three states of matter: solid, liquid, and gas. Whereas in the Indian philosophy, they mentioned one more intermediate energy state called Tejas or Agni, and the last state called Akasha or space. Akasha does not mean sky. Akasha means space. Avakasha is inner space. Akasha is outer space. So, you can see in this picture, sun is glowing. We can say that sun is a star which is burning. It is nothing but, it is a hydrogen becoming helium. There is a nuclear fusion happening, due to which large amount of energy is released. All that we can typically say by the knowledge of our physics. But who decides? With whose decision is sun burning? Read the Purusha Sukta. You have the distinct answer there. Chandrama manaso jataha chakshos suryo ajayata mukhadindrascha agnischa pranad vayurajayata nabhya asidantariksham. Read the Purusha Sukta, understand the meaning of the Purusha Sukta, then you will understand whatever I am saying. Through whose directions the stars are moving, through whose directions the sun is burning, or through whose intention the sun is burning, who else but the universal consciousness? That is why in the Vedas, they worshipped Agni, and the fire which they put for Havana or Homa, that is only an indication of the divine Agni. It doesn't mean that when you put some arani or wooden sticks, and when you put some ghee there, and when you light a camper, and when you have Agni Chayana, when people perform Agni Hotra, it doesn't mean that that fire is God. It means that through this fire, try to understand the transformation of matter. Is fire solid? No. Is fire liquid? No. Is fire vapor? No. Is fire empty? No. What is that fire? The fire is a transition between solid, liquid, and gas, right? Those wooden sticks are solid. That ghee which we use is liquid. And now when the fire is burning, we don't know. All this solid and liquid is gradually becoming vaporized. So we should say fire is a transition state in between. And then we should also say fire is also a state of matter. As physics says, only solid state, liquid says gaseous state. There is an intermediate state that is called the state of fire, state of transition. There is a process in metallurgy called annealing. What they do is, how do they make the steel strong? There is a process called annealing, where they heat the steel, then they allow it to cool, again they heat it, again they allow it to cool, again they heat it, again they allow it to cool. They keep on doing this process of heating and cooling. At the end of this process, steel becomes much stronger. That process is called annealing. Which means what? When the steel is heated, it is slightly becoming liquefied and the atoms are going away. And again, when the steel is cooled, all those atoms are coming nearer once again. Again, it is heated, they are slightly going away because of liquefaction. Again, they are coming back because of solidification. And at the end of the annealing process, these atoms of the steel would have come so much nearer and the steel becomes so stronger. Now think about it. Do they have their own consciousness of going away and coming nearer? Do these iron atoms, steel is nothing but iron atoms only, do they have their own consciousness of going away and coming nearer? Are they deciding? Now how come that binding is happening? Because of the process of annealing. And what for annealing is done? For making the steel strong. And which one is causing this annealing? Heat itself. So heat is Agni. There is optimum amount of temperature on this earth right now, because of which life is produced on this earth. Whereas in the Mars it is not there. Mars has become cooler now because Mars is away from the sun. In the Venus it is not happening because Venus is hotter now because it is nearer to sun. After a few millenniums, when sun keeps on burning and reduces the temperature, gradually earth will become cooler. And there will be optimum temperature on Venus. Life will be produced in Venus later on. That is where temperature or heat or fire or Agni or Tejas is also considered as one of the 5 elements, especially in the Indian philosophy. You are seeing the sun, you are seeing the clouds, you are not seeing the air. But it is the air which is causing the clouds to move. Whenever we experience the blow of air, we feel highly exhilarated, highly happy. When we climb a mountain or a hill, when we stand at the top of the mountain or a hill, when a cool breeze is blowing there, we don't want to come down below. We want to remain at the top of the mountain, keeping on experiencing the cool breeze. It keeps on blowing there on the top of the hills or the mountains. But at the lower level, wind is not always blowing. But at the upper level, wind is continuously blowing. Nearer to Bengaluru, there is a small hill called Shivaganga. Those who have not yet gone there, please go there once and climb till the top of the hill. Stay there for some time. You will always have the cool breeze blowing there. But when you come down below, you will not experience the same breeze there. Which means, whatever you call as air is not as simple as you think about it. Nearer to the surface of earth, air is not always blowing or wind is not always blowing. But above, it is always blowing. Reason is, it has to carry the clouds. Which simply means, it is just 4 to 5 kilometers of atmosphere from the surface of the earth till the clouds. It is hardly 4 to 5 to 6 kilometers of atmosphere. In this atmosphere, the blow of air is non-uniform, which means there is a continuous decision to keep the air blowing, to keep the clouds moving? Is it all simply happening by itself? Those who can see will see. Those who can see will understand. Those who can see will realize the divine laws that are governing the movement of clouds. It is not as simple as we say that because of the sunlight, water will vaporize and it will go top, it will become clouds and it will come down here and it will become a rain. We cannot simply say it is a rain cycle. Who keeps on making the air to move? Who decides to have the breeze continuously moving? Who else but the natural consciousness, Adi Shakti? If you realize this movement of air, then you know that there is a divine will working always in nature, governing these five elements. Governing earth, governing water, governing fire, governing air, governing space itself. Look at this beauty. Below there is grass, there are hills, there are trees growing, there is cloud, there is air. You just understand the relationship between all of them. There is a distinct relationship for the growth of this grass and the trees with the waterfall due to rain. And there is a distinct relationship for the clouds with the rainfall. Clouds are carrying water molecules. And there is a distinct relationship between clouds and the movement of air. Air and the movement of clouds are fully related. Now, even the movement of air is because of the natural law. Natural law is nothing but the divine law. Now, because of the divine law, the clouds are accumulated together. When the clouds are accumulated together, whatever are the water molecules stored in the clouds are pouring down as rain. And that rainwater is nourishing the surface of earth. And you have these crops. You are seeing a field where the crops are being grown. And you can see there rain is falling down. Now you are seeing the clouds as dark in color because sun is at the top. Sunlight is not coming down because of the heavy collection of water within the clouds. And when the sun is not coming down, the same clouds appear for us who are at the lower level as dark clouds. The same clouds, when they get rarefied and there is no more rain there, then the same sunlight comes down, then we see the same clouds as white clouds. So rainfall is because of Adi Shakti, natural consciousness. That is the relationship between vegetation and rainfall. Wherever there is more vegetation, there will be rainfall. Why? The divine mother is watching the nature. And the divine mother is deciding, I have my children below who are growing. I have my children, all these plants, all these trees, all these crops, they are my children. They will have to produce grains now. And through the seeds, I should replicate these plants. Through the seeds, let my other children survive, consuming the seeds as food. So the divine mother decides that wherever there are my children, let me carry the clouds there. Let me cause the rainfall there. and let the forests grow, let the plants grow, let the trees grow. That is the basic relationship between cultivation of forests and rainfall. That is the basic need of natural balance. So you can see Prithvi, Apaha, Tejaha, Vayuhu, Akasha. The five divine elements are creating life also on this earth. And gradually, through the same five divine elements, the tree will stop growing, the tree will dry out after the tree's purpose is served. This tree, which has been having lot of leaves, lot of fruits, lot of seeds, gradually will lose all its essences after its predetermined time is over. And when the body is no more having the essential elements for the production of further life, this body has to perish, it has to decompose. Even the tallest tree has to die one day. Even the oldest tree has to die one day. Even the oldest human being has to die one day. Because gradually, within any living body, there is a continuous production and reproduction of many tissues, many cells, and gradually aging is inadvertently going to happen in all the living organisms or the living forms. And after some time, when the body loses all its essential materials, so to say, or when the body loses its way of remaining efficient, on particular time, the self will decide just to discard the vehicle. All these living bodies are just different types of vehicles for the self. And when the self decides to just discard the vehicle won't remain living anymore. And that is when the decomposers will take their role. Inside your body and my body, the decomposers are waiting to start their functionality. They are right now dormant. And the time comes when your body will get aged, my body will get aged. Somebody may live longer, somebody may live lesser, somebody may practice yoga and live longer, somebody may not practice yoga and may live lesser. But all the bodies will have aging. And the decomposers are waiting for that particular time when breathing will stop, when we will start our work. And when breathing will stop, the breathing will stop when the self decides to discard the vehicle. That is why I had mentioned the three things called producers, consumers, and decomposers. Plants are the producers, animals are the consumers, microbes are the decomposers. Now, if all these five elements, including space, are made up of what? Maybe space, which is exterior, is empty with any materials. But the space which is interior, for example, the atmosphere, is filled with air. So if atmosphere is filled with air, you will see the arrangement of all these molecules: oxygen, hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, chlorine, fluorine, and then nitrogen hydrogen combination, carbon nitrogen combination, carbon hydrogen combination, hydrogen carbon nitrogen combination. This way you will have an arrangement of different types of atoms, and then you will have molecules, which means who is deciding which one to mix with which one so that this will become this one. As I've been telling you, all these atoms have no consciousness on their own. But then you may say, sir, in the labs we use heat, we use fire, and we make them to combine. Yes, in your labs you are artificially making them to combine for your own purposes. But let us keep away all our labs aside. As I told you last time, with all your facilities, you cannot manufacture one drop of blood. With all your facilities, you cannot produce one rice grain in your lab. You are dependent on nature only. With all these test tube babies, or with all these new inventions of any test tube related fertility or whatever, cloning or whatever, still for a body to grow, you need a uterus, you need a womb. In the test tube, you can only make this sperm and ovum to have an embryo or a zygote, not an embryo as well, a zygote, a fertile ovum that will be inseminated into a lady's womb only. Without the lady's womb, how that zygote will become a living body? So with all these facilities which you have in technology, you cannot simply say you can do everything without the natural intervention. So to some extent, human beings have violated the natural laws by applying these energies to forcefully combine one thing with the other. That is when they have suffered also because of hydrogen bomb, nuclear bombs. Whenever they did such things, they are facing the calamities also. 200-300 years before, people were fighting with the swords, with the spears. Now they fight with remote controlled missiles. Now they fight with guns and rifles and revolvers. So artificially they developed the mechanism of forcing a steel bullet into someone else's body by means of a ignition of fire inside a revolver or inside a rifle or inside a gun. Now, is it for the better or is it for the worse? In whatever way material science was invented, the material science was put into wrong usage by the human beings themselves for their own destruction, and in addition to destroy nature also. So let us keep all your technologies aside. Let us keep all your modern achievements aside. Because with more and more of technology, human beings have been creating more and more of problems only, nothing else. But you may still say, sir, this online class is a benefit for us. That is because of the technology only. No. Yes, I'll agree. This online class is happening because of the advent of technology only. That I agree. But me and you are there. How many people are there? There are totally 15 people including me. That means totally 14 people listening to me. So these 15 fools are using this technology for discussing the secrets of spirituality. How much of percentage of these 700 billion odd people on this earth are using this technology for the same purpose now? So many people may be using this technology for watching porn movies also. So many people may be using this technology for spying and hacking websites also. So many people may be making this technology for illegal financial online transactions also, for stealing money from the bank accounts also. So many people may be using this technology for spreading viruses also, computer viruses, software viruses. And so many people may be using this technology only for watching funny WhatsApp videos also, funny YouTube videos also. And okay, we need not be so much negative. So many people may be using this technology for education also, maybe modern education also, online education also, for learning also. Even I have used this technology for lot of learning only. I have also used the internet extensively for learning itself. Okay, there is this positive side also, there is this negative side also. We shall agree upon that. But how much of positive usage? How much percentage is really positive usage? Mostly it is for negative usage. We have all types of social media, news magazines, everything is there. How much of it is for positive usage? I regret to say it's a very less percentage. That is why let us keep all your technologies aside. Let us not boast about the human achievements as such. Because someday all these human achievements will drastically fail. If humans do not understand the divine laws will not take more time to destroy anything and everything as such. So all the human laws may not work at all if the divine laws become stronger than the human laws. Human beings have to realize that they belong to nature. Instead, now human beings are thinking that nature belongs to them. It's a totally wrong understanding. As long as human beings remain in harmony with nature, divine laws will come back into good force. Otherwise, divine laws will enforce such that human laws will no more work. In spite of all our medical facilities, still people are sick. With all types of new medical diagnostic achievements, still new diseases are formed. Which simply means all the human achievements are not going to help much as such. Actually, all these technologies are helping we 15 people for having online discussion. That way I should thank the technology now. Now, apart from that, in nature, if all these atoms have to join together and something has to become methane, ethane, propane, butane, acetylene, it has to become so many types of hydrocarbons. Now there is a divine intelligence which is causing all these atoms to get bound. Maybe single bond, double bond, triple bond, ionic bond, covalent bond, many types of bondings. People who have studied chemistry know that all these types of bondings exist. So it simply means that there is this consciousness working within and working without, working everywhere for the bonding of the atoms into molecules. And because of the bondings of the atoms into molecules, we have air, we have liquid, we have solid. You can see this pictorial depiction of the bonds. where you have atoms, and atoms are connected to each other by means of a strange bond. Even though this picture is like this, we are not fully sure the bond will be like this only as a straight line. We know that the atoms are bound together, but the bonding need not be exactly in this manner only. We don't know really. Everything that we cannot see in using microscope, we diagrammatically represent them as if they are bound by means of these straight lines. But what is this bond made up of? There is an atom other side, there is an atom this side. In between them, if there is a line, what is that line made up of? Binding energy. There is some energy which is deciding to keep two atoms together. And the distance is lesser in case of ice, distance is more in case of a water molecule. So we cannot simply say it is always a straight line there. This bond can be of an elastic nature. The bond can be nearer or far away. When you take out an ice cube from your refrigerator and when you keep it in a vessel on your gas stove, after a few minutes the same ice cube will become water. You keep on boiling it, the same water will become a steam. Now we visualize the bonding between them. When it was an ice cube, all the water molecules were tightly bound. When you put it on a gas stove, now it is rarefied and the bonding between hydrogen and oxygen is going away, and when it becomes steam, they are still going far away. Still they are bound only, right? Even in the steam, hydrogen and oxygen are bound. Even in the water, hydrogen and oxygen are bound. Even in the ice, hydrogen and oxygen are bound. So you cannot simply visualize only a straight line always there. It is of an elastic nature. It is of a flexible bonding. And because of the flexible bonding only, we bring Agni there, fire there, heat there, temperature there. Now if all these atoms are made up of protons, neutrons and electrons, as we already know, the electrons are moving around the atoms, we already know. And it is the nucleus which is causing the weight for an atom, that also we know. The weight of electrons is negligible when compared to the weight of protons and neutrons. This we already know. Each and every element in the periodic table has got a particular atomic weight also. That also we know. Now, an atom is made up of protons, neutrons and electrons. Protons are positively charged, electrons are negatively charged, neutrons are neutral. That way they are mentioned. This was an outcome of atomic theory by the invention of Niels Bohr, Rutherford, maybe including Max Planck's theory, maybe later on including Einstein's theory, maybe afterwards adding all the findings of the modern inventions about the atomic physics. So we think we know a lot about atoms. Okay, let us assume that we know a lot about atoms. But the nuclear physicists could not get all their answers now also. Elements are made up of molecules. Molecules are made up of atoms. Atoms are made up of protons, neutrons and electrons. They were thinking by then that electrons are the smallest particles on this earth or in this nature. That is what they were thinking at that time, that electrons are the smallest particles. But later on, again people started thinking, are electrons smallest? If electrons are smallest, what is causing the electron itself? How come electrons come into existence? all the atomic weight is there at the nucleus because of the neutrons. And the positive and negative charges are balanced by means of protons and electrons together. And all electrons are moving around the atom in specific orbits. And the number of electrons and the number of protons are always equal. When an electron leaves an orbit, then the atom becomes positively charged because protons are fixed there. When another electron comes into the atom, atom becomes negatively charged because the number of electrons are more now. This is what they thought. Based on this, they classified the materials into conductors, semiconductors and insulators. In case of insulators, electrons will never go out of the orbit. In case of conductors, they will have a lot of free electrons at the outermost orbits and the electrons keep on moving when an electromotive force is applied. And in case of semiconductors, they are exactly 4 in number at the outermost orbit. They don't want to donate also, they don't want to accept also. That way they are called semiconductors. Carbon, silicon, germanium, tin, lead in the group 14 in the periodic table. This is what they thought for many decades or many centuries, that we have come to the end of the physical knowledge where we have reached an electron. Electron is the smallest possible particle on this earth. That is what they thought at that time. But that is not the answer. Answer is, how come electrons come into picture? If electron is a small particle, we think electron is the smallest particle, but before that we were thinking atom was the smallest particle. Before that we were thinking molecule was the smallest particle. Now before Rutherford's theory or Niels Bohr's theory, they were thinking atoms are the smallest particle. Before that they were thinking molecules were the smallest particle. It all depends on our ability to see. When microscopes were not available, which particle we were thinking as the smallest particle? Whatever was visible to our eyes, we used to think this is so small. With the invention of the microscope, people started looking at objects, even those particles which could not be seen through the naked eye could be seen through the microscope. Now again, the microscope can see microns. It is called as microscope. It can see up to the micrometer size, 10 power minus 6 meter size. The normal human eye can see millimeter size. 1 mm, 1 millimeter can be easily distinguishably observed by the human eye. Now 1000 part of that 1 millimeter is 1 micrometer. That can be easily detected by a microscope. So they thought electrons are not visible even to microscope. So they thought maybe finally we have a theory where electrons are smallest. But then they came to know it may not be so. It may not be so. Inside an atom, you have nucleus, you have protons, you have neutrons, you have electrons. Every electron has an orbit. Now the electron moves around an orbit in a specified orbit. Who decides this orbit? And if electrons are formed, how come electrons are formed in the first place? From where electrons are emerging? There is space in between an electron and a nucleus. That means there is space everywhere. People were thinking only there is an exterior space. Internally everything is packed. But now they visualize even inside an atom, there is enough space. Electrons are so small. They are going around the nucleus. In between, there are paths and orbits. But there is space. So the space must be conscious. The space, whichever we call it as empty space, may not be empty. Because how can an empty space produce electrons? How can an empty space produce nucleus? Now they came to a conclusion. Space is not empty. In the Ishavasya Upanishad, one great verse is there. Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnam Adaya Purnameva Avashishyate. Please read the Ishavasya Upanishad. That is when I give a definition for space. Systematically planned action of consciousness and energy. Space is conscious. Space is divine. Space is God. That is why in the Indian philosophy, they considered space as the first element. First Akasha, then Vayu, then Agni, then Apaha, then Prithvi. This is the sequence that is told in the Upanishads also. So the rishis, before the time of Kanada or before the time of Gautama, Gautama and Kanada had the formulations of Nyaya and Vaisheshika Darshana. Before that itself, rishis had understood space is not empty. Space is full. Because from an empty space, how can anything be created? From an empty space, how can a binding energy come out? From an empty space, how can electrons come out? There is consciousness everywhere. And there is energy everywhere. And they are together. Adi Shankara says in his Saundarya Lahari Stotra, Shivashaktya yukto yadi bhavati shakta prabhavitum na chedevam devo na khalu kushala spanditumapi atastvamadhyam harihara virinchadibhirapi pranantum stotum va kathamakrita punya prabhavati. Adi Shankara says in his poetry Saundarya Lahari, Shivaha Shaktya Yuktaha. Consciousness along with energy. Read one book called Tao of Physics, written by Fritjof Capra. He was a great physicist. He was a great scientist. Later, he turned himself into a great spiritualist. And he mentions something called Tao of Physics, where he discusses so many other modern findings of atomic physics. These are the modern findings. We have to come to a conclusion. Whatever we consider till now as an empty space cannot be an empty space, because empty space contains stars. Empty space contains planets around stars. Empty space contains 5 elements in the planets. Empty space contains molecules in these elements. Empty space contains atoms in these elements. Empty space contains protons, neutrons, and electrons in these elements. In that case, how can space be empty? How come from an empty space all these minute things and biggest things can emerge? We have to come to a conclusion. Space can never be empty. From an emptiness, fullness never will come out. So, space is fullness only. Space is God. Space is omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, divine, infinite. Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma. Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma. Vijnanam, Anandam, Brahma. Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah. My father's house has many mansions. What all this means? However, the atomic physicists could not keep quiet at all. They kept on thinking there must be something beyond. There must be something visible to the microscope. They kept on probing further. And they kept on naming these things, protons and neutrons. And they kept on finding out that neutrons are made up of some other things called quarks. Till then they did not worry much about neutrons. Now they found out some other smaller particles by means of which neutrons are formed. You can see that in the picture here. So neutrons are formed by means of quarks. Again, the quarks are connected by means of some other spiral bonds. That way, they have visualized. So now, they started studying quarks now. When they started studying quarks, they classified quarks into up quark, down quark, anti-up quark, anti-down quark, charm quark, strange quark, top quark, bottom quark. Next, they came down to mesons, baryons, deuteron. Proton and neutron are together deuteron. Any new meson? Any new baryon? People have been thinking electrons are smallest. Then they came to know there is plus infinity, and we don't know there can be up to zero. Something may not be zero at all. Let us say we can go on visualizing about big, bigger, biggest up to infinity. Now we can visualize about small, smaller, smallest up to what? Up to zero. That means whatever we thought as small may not be small. Whatever we thought as big may not be big. There may be smaller than the small. There may be bigger than the big. We don't know. We are deciding everything only based on our abilities of seeing. But whatever we are seeing is limited to our eyes. Whatever an ant seeing is limited to its own eyes. Whatever an elephant seeing is limited to its own eyes. Whatever is small to an elephant may be big to an ant. Whatever is big to an ant may be small to an elephant. We as human beings think that we can decide upon what is small and what is big. Now the atomic physics is totally confused about what to call as small, what to call as big. Electrons are not the end of material science. There are other particles. Quarks leptons. Matter particles, gauge particles. Strong force, electromagnetic force, gluons, photons, bosons. You heard about bosons, right? You heard about Higgs bosons particles, Z bosons, W bosons. You heard about God particle, right? They started calling it as God particle. God laughs and says, I am not the particle. Whatever you call as my particle, I will create a smaller particle than that which you cannot see also, which you cannot think also. In whatever way human beings conduct experiments, God may keep posing more challenges which may be beyond the perceptions of human beings. So they have called it as Higgs boson particles. And at times, this magnetic force is called as the weakest force. But it is strange that they call it as the weakest force, where it is the strongest force which is keeping the planets around the sun. When planets are revolving around the sun, can we say that the magnetic force is weakest? We don't know. They call it that way based on their own perceptions. So, they still keep on trying to find the smallest particle. But the Rishi laughs at all these scientists and the Rishi says, don't try to understand something that is external to you. Why don't you try to understand that thing which is internal to you? Why are you wasting your time in trying to understand all these external things? You may not understand everything as such at all. It is better that you limit your understanding to your own self. Fish may not understand the complete ocean at all. Why? It will not understand the complete ocean at all. If at all fish wants to see the whole ocean, when it crosses hardly 10% of the ocean, fish may die on its way. Fish has its limited existence. So it is better that the fish tries to understand the water which is within instead of trying to understand the ocean. Vyasa says in the Mahabharata, Sarvaha Sarvam na janati. Everyone does not understand everything. Everyone does not know everything. Sarvam jnatum na shakyate. It is not possible to know everything. And it is not required to know everything. It is enough if you know your own thing. It is enough if you know what is keeping you alive, what has made you for your existence, and what is going to be the end of your existence. If you understand that, that is enough. That is what Rishi says. And the Rishi laughs at all the modern achievements of the so-called 21st century scientists, where the problems of humanity have not been reduced. The problems of humanity have been increased by these materialistic findings. Continuing further, protons, neutrons, mesons, leptons, electron, muon, tau, E neutrino, M neutrino, T neutrino, quarks, upcharm, top down, strange, bottom, bosons, photons, gluons, IVBs, gravitons. They gave one more new name called gravitons. Means this gravity itself is a very strange magnetic force. So if this gravity is causing the production of these particles, they started calling it as gravitons. And this naming ceremony goes on. Whatever they visualize, whatever they see, or whatever they imagine, for everything, they keep on giving names. God is laughing. My universe is infinite. You keep on naming. By keeping on naming, you people will perish. Or I will make you perish in one way or the other. I am infinite. You being finite. Why are you bothered about me? Why don't you bother about yourselves? Remember the story of Laplace? You have been given limited time. Why don't you use that limited time for understanding yourselves? Why are you trying to understand my universe as such? Maybe this is what God is thinking about us now. However, the nuclear scientists or the material physicists, they developed one more theory now, beyond the theory of quarks or beyond the theory of leptons or mesons or baryons or gravitons or Higgs bosons. They developed the next theory called string theory. So it is 9:05 now. Let me end my session for today. Let us talk about the string theory on Monday. Until then, take care and goodbye.